It's been a decade since the original Gears of War came out, and we're now officially 5 games into the series. So how do they all stack up to each other? Is the brand new Gears of War 4 the best? Worst? Middle? Let's rank them and find out. At the bottom, number 5, is Gears of War Judgment, easily the worst Gears of War game. It isn't necessarily bad. If it were the only Gears game made, it might even be considered great. But compared to everything that came out before it, it just falls completely flat on its face, offering one of the worst campaigns in the series. It tried to do this whole mini-mission approach to things where you'd competitively try to get top scores for each chapter, but this led to a campaign that just felt like a lot of mini-missions with a bare thread of a plot connecting them all together. And this isn't helped by the game having some of the weakest dialogue in the franchise. The actual core gameplay was still solid, but it did little to nothing to differentiate itself from what was already done in 3, making it feel like it really wasn't a new Gears game at all, and ultimately pretty forgettable. Coming in at number 4 is the original Gears of War. Now, when it was first released, this was an excellent game, and for many people was the reason they got a 360 in the first place. It didn't reinvent the wheel exactly, cover shooters existed before it, but Gears of War represented a refinement of that genre to a whole new level, offering tight cover controls and environments built specifically around the cover mechanic. Not to mention, it was one of the best split-screen co-op games of its generation. Sadly though, time has not been the best to it, and while it was great for its day, it just doesn't hold up as well when its sequels did such an excellent job of building and improving upon it. The AI is not exactly the series' finest, and the plotline is really straightforward, and is honestly kind of a dull backdrop to just justify needing to kill a lot of things until you see the credits roll. If you haven't played any of the Gears games before, this one can be worth checking out first, but doing it later, it's just not gonna hold up. Now, right in the middle at 3rd place is Gears of War 4. While coming from a new studio, this game did a much better job of acting as a sort of mini-reboot to the series than Judgment was. Its team of heroes are a lot more glib and give a greater sense of energy than the weariness present in the originals. And while the overall story has its problems, 4 easily has the best character banter. Its biggest strength really comes from what few changes they did take risks with, introducing a lot of new environmental factors like strong winds and cover that can turn into enemies if destroyed, and some really interesting new weapons like the drop shot. Rendering cover is kind of pointless if you can time it right. An upgraded horde mode and redone multiplayer unlock system round all this out really nicely, but the one thing holding this game back is it knew it wanted to be the start of a new trilogy and drove that point home a little too hard. The last act, while fun, is a rush to a finish that doesn't really feel like a resolution at all, with a cliffhanger that's kinda cool in concept, but doesn't really have that much impact in the way it's delivered. In the end, making it feel like an action-heavy prologue to something greater we can hope to see in a couple years. It's a great start, but the assumption of future games and having little exposition about the world keeps it from really topping the better games in the series. Which leads us to number 2 on this list, Gears of War 3. There's a lot that Gears of War 3 did right. It had easily the strongest and best opening in the whole series, and for the most part, the campaign kept that energy up. It had some of the greatest variety of environments, even if they were all still multiple shades of brown. It introduced a whole bunch of new enemies, and offered some of the best specific fights and battles to stick into your memory. Its biggest problem, though, is how it served as the original trilogy's finale. As much effort as there was to expand the scope of the campaign, that much more went into trying to add a layer of emotion to the story that just couldn't help but feel forced and unsatisfactory. There's a lot of character development and plot revelations that come out of nowhere in the last act. It was just trying to do so much all at once it killed any sense of pacing. It was still a fantastic game overall, but much like 4, it felt like it just missed a few important beats to really put it at the top. And that's what leads us to the best Gears of War game, which you've probably figured out by now by process of elimination, Gears of War 2. While 3 did a good job of fine-tuning the gameplay of 2, 2 was leaps and bounds ahead of the original. 2 took what was originally a macho-fueled, non-stop action game with a few hintings of greater plot that was left unexplored, and actually started to take its time fleshing everything out. Characters started to have more backstory and personality, and the thematic tones running underneath the campaign began to have a lot more going on aside from just, hell yeah, blow stuff up. While it didn't try to tackle as grand of a story as 3, that's part of its strength. It has a much more focused plot and storyline with a handful of emotional scenes that are still some of the strongest moments across the whole franchise. And let's not forget an opening that was pretty much just straight out of Lord of the Rings, corny, but pretty epic feeling at the same time. Tack onto this the introduction of the Horde multiplayer mode, a lot of refinements to core gameplay like chainsaw duels, and a much more fleshed out and interesting Locust civilization, and 2 just hit all of the right notes.